A cyborg fights a warlord with psychic powers to save his wife. Strap in, movie enthusiasts, it's recap time. I bring you one more recap. Today, we will be recapping a film called Hardcore Henry from the year 2015, which deals with the concept of human enhancement with mechanic parts. I hope you enjoy the video, so let's start. The movie is shown from the point of view of Henry, the movie's protagonist. The movie opens with one of Henry's childhood memories, where he gets bullied by 3 boys. Henry's dad, who is very strict, arrives and rescues Henry from the bullies but mocks him for not defending himself. Henry wakes up in the present, in a lab where he's a grown adult. He is awakened by a woman named Estelle, inside a water tank, with his left leg and left hand missing. Estelle is a scientist who's hoarding a lot of secrets. Henry can't speak because his speech module hasn't been installed, and he has no memory of who he is or how he got here. Estelle informs him that his name is Henry, and he was in an accident. She installs a robotic hand and a robotic leg on Henry's missing parts. Estelle reveals she is Henry's wife and hands him their wedding ring. She introduces Henry to her colleagues, Robbie and Timothy, who are playing loud music. Estelle asks them to install Henry's voice, but before they can do that, the lab gets attacked by a man named Aiken and his soldiers. Aiken is a psychotic warlord with psychic abilities, fixated on ruling the world with his cyborg army. Aiken enters the lab and takes everyone hostage. He corners Estelle and questions her if the cyborg in front of him is Henry. Aiken reveals to Henry that he provided the raw materials for Estelle to revive Henry. Henry doesn't respond due to not having any voice modules installed, so Aiken orders Timothy to inform Henry of the condition of his arrival. Timothy reveals that Henry's left leg and left hand were shot off. His eyes were missing, and his jaw was shred to pieces, which meant Henry is a cyborg now. Aiken agrees with Timothy only to raise him in the air with his powers and stab him to death. Meanwhile, Estelle plays loud music, which distracts Aiken and his men, so Henry and Estelle manage to escape. Henry mistakenly opens the exit door, revealing that the lab is on an airship. Estelle saves him, and they both hop in an escape pod. They release the pod's parachute, but they land so quickly that the pod crashes. The pod lands on a Russian highway, where Aiken's mercenaries arrive before Henry and Estelle can escape. Estelle guides Henry to fight, but he's not used to his new body parts, so the mercenaries beat him up. They tase him and throw him off the bridge. Henry lands on a car but rises again. He hides from the mercenaries while they fan out to find Henry. Henry enters a container where he rips off the windscreen wiper of a car and stabs a mercenary with it. He takes his gun and attacks the mercenaries to flee the scene, but still gets cornered. A mysterious man named Jimmy arrives and eliminates the mercenaries to rescue Henry. Jimmy asks Henry to come with him because he has been waiting the past 3 years for this moment. They leave in Jimmy's car, where he guides Henry to plug a device into his chest to examine his health. The device reveals Henry's name and that he might live for only 30 minutes, so Jimmy decides to take Henry to his lab. They get stopped by the police, so Jimmy hands Henry a bag of new clothes for disguise. The cops attack them because they are working for Aiken. Jimmy gets shot in the head, so their car crashes. Henry escapes with the bag and enters a shop to change his clothes. The cops find him and try to capture him, but Henry shoots them. He runs into more cops, so he runs back onto the street and hops on a bus. There, a homeless man approaches him, and it's Jimmy in disguise. Jimmy is still alive, and he forcefully rips out a small device from Henry's arm. He tells Henry that Aiken has been following him through this tracking device. He informs Henry that his systems are going to shut down soon, so he needs to find a man named Slick Dimitri and murder him to steal his charge pump, which is under his heart. Dimitri is Aiken's Russian connection who handled Aiken's cops, guns, real estate, and a bunch of other things. Jimmy hands Henry a phone with Dimitri's location and instructs Henry to meet him after the completion of his task. Meanwhile, a man in a metal suit arrives, wielding a flamethrower. The man fires at them and burns Jimmy alive, while Henry takes Jimmy's gun and manages to escape. Subsequently, Henry arrives at Dimitri's building and climbs his way in. He runs into Dimitri's security guards and brutally executes all of them one by one. He enters Dimitri's apartment and finds Dimitri sitting still in a room. He kicks Dimitri on the floor and he's still motionless, but suddenly Estelle appears on the screens behind Henry. She informs him that Aiken has started his plan, and if they don't stop him, he'll have his army in a few days or sooner. Meanwhile, Dmitri springs into action and attacks Henry. They both get into a gunfight, but Dmitri escapes from the building. Henry chases him in the city and eventually catches him. Henry beats up Dmitri until he cracks and says he has something important to say regarding Jimmy. Before he could reveal anything, Dmitri gets his head blown off by Akan's sniper mercenaries, shooting from far away. Henry drags Dmitri's body and rips out his heart. He finds the booster charging pump attached to his heart and rips it. Henry escapes Akan's snipers and runs off to call Jimmy. Jimmy is still alive and sends Henry his location, which is at a fancy place. Henry arrives at Jimmy's location, and it's a strip club. A striper takes Henry to Jimmy, but Henry's system slowly starts shutting down. Jimmy asks for the charge pump, so Henry hands it to him. Jimmy tries to put the pump inside Henry, but he chickens out and passes out on the floor. Another Jimmy arrives who looks much more neat and clean. He installs the pump in Henry's chest, restoring his power, and tells him they have to go to his lab, which will clear away the confusion for Henry. The phone rings in the room, and Jimmy gets informed that Akan and his men have arrived in the strip club, so Jimmy escapes, leaving Henry with the strippers. Henry finds guns in the cabinet and goes to war with Akan's men in the strip club. He shoots dozens of mercenaries and gets aided by the previous Jimmy and two dominatrix assassins, Olga and Katya, who also have beef with Akan. Henry runs into a room where he comes across Akan. Akan slays a man by launching a silver plate in his head and pushes away Henry with his powers. Akan reveals that he has Estelle locked in one of his trucks downstairs. Henry escapes through a vent and lands in the parking lot. There, he meets another Jimmy, who has taken down more of Akan's men. This Jimmy is a hippie who is a pacifist. He interrogates one of Akan's goons with Henry, and finds out that Akan's men are taking Estelle back to their base. Jimmy compels Henry to hop on his bike to go after Akan's van. Olga and Katya arrive, and they all chase Akan's goon. They find them on a highway, and Henry shoots more mercenaries while launching grenades in some of the vans. Eventually, he finds the van that holds Estelle. There, he slays two more goons and rescues Estelle. Estelle confesses her love for Henry, and they both are about to kiss until Akan makes his entry by blowing a hole in the van, which knocks out both of them. Henry wakes up and finds Estelle again in Akan's possession. Akan takes out his baseball bat and proposes a deal for Henry. Either he shoots Estelle, or Henry sacrifices himself. Henry hesitates, but he is out of options, so he agrees to sacrifice himself so Akan doesn't shoot Estelle. Akan knocks out Henry with the bat and throws him off the van. Henry wakes up with Akan's goons trying to bury him, but help arrives on time. Hippie Jimmy and Olga quickly shoot the mercenaries and fix Henry. They repair some of Henry's eyes and find out that Henry has a memory blocker in his system. They reboot Henry, so he can rest for a while. After Henry wakes up 15 minutes later, Jimmy tells him to follow him so they can leave, but Jimmy gets caught in an explosion and dies along with Katya. More mercenaries fire from a tank, so Henry wields Katya's sword and jumps on the tank. He enters the tank and slices the throats of two mercenaries and takes their guns, but further mercenaries arrive in a helicopter. Henry rushes towards them and shoots the one sliding down from a rope. He climbs the rope to enter the helicopter until the men aboard the chopper cut the rope. Henry falls in the forest, but survives the fall due to his cyborg body. His phone starts ringing, and it's Jimmy sending him his current location. Henry finds a horse walking by and tries to ride it for a lift, but the horse knocks him down. He walks his way to Jimmy's location and finds a camouflaged Jimmy covered in leaves. He takes him to his laboratory apartment, where they stumble upon three dirty cops trying to assault a woman. Henry jumps in and beats two cops while shoving a baton down one cop's throat. Jimmy shoots all the cops and orders the girl to leave. They both then proceed to enter Jimmy's lab, where Jimmy plays a video for Henry. The video reveals that Jimmy used to work for Akan, where he created cyborg soldiers for Akan by using the remains of deceased people. Jimmy tests the cyborg soldiers for Akan's army, but the test goes awful because the soldiers lacked a motive to perform, so Akan crushes Jimmy's spine, rendering him permanently disabled. Back in the lab, the real Jimmy rolls in the lab on a wheelchair and meets Henry. He reveals that he used to work with Akan so his research could be funded until he discovered Akan's real motives. Jimmy reveals that he can't move or travel to different places, so he created different clones of himself that he can control from his wheelchair. A Jimmy clone plugs in Henry to his computer and examines Henry's body. While the computer analyzes Henry's body, Jimmy introduces his various clones to Henry. After meeting all of them, Jimmy's computer points out that Henry's eyes are live broadcasting whatever he is seeing, which means Aiken is aware of the location of Jimmy's lab. Punk Jimmy locks Henry to a mechanic chair and calls him a traitor. He decides to shut Henry off, but Henry kicks him and frees himself. The rest of Jimmy's clones try to shut Henry off, but he fights all of them until Jimmy gets an alert that Akan's forces have arrived. Henry wakes up the original Jimmy to stop him from using clones. Original Jimmy begs Henry to shoot him because Aiken will only torture him, but Henry tries to encourage him to fight Aiken together through gestures. Jimmy agrees and reveals that Henry was his friend. That's why he rescued him. Jimmy wakes up his clones to fight Akan's forces and to help Henry rescue his wife from Akan. The camouflage Jimmy tells Henry to look into Akan's eyes when he takes his life. They then proceed to set up bombs in the lab and arm themselves with sniper guns. Henry climbs the roof with camouflage Jimmy and snipes some mercenaries, while Punk Jimmy attacks them on the ground and blows them up with himself. Camouflage Jimmy instructs Henry to circle back with Colonel Jimmy, before sacrificing himself by jumping on Akan's forces with multiple grenades. Henry goes downstairs and teams up with Colonel Jimmy. They arm themselves with more guns and more grenades. The Colonel and Henry place original Jimmy with another clone on a lift. Colonel informs Henry that original Jimmy is their priority because if he dies, all the clones die. Henry now enters the lower levels of the building with the Colonel and fights off Akan's men. They shoot mercenaries with guns and blow them up with grenades while ensuring original Jimmy's protection. After Henry and Colonel Jimmy eliminate the mercenaries from the lower floors, they land on the ground floor. They catch up with the original Jimmy, but they get outnumbered by Akan's forces. Akan's right-hand man, Yuri, surrounds Jimmy and mocks him for being crippled, but Jimmy explodes the bombs in his lab above, which bring down the ceiling, killing Yuri and all of his men. Afterward, they all leave in a van and head to Akan's base to finish him once and for all. On their way to Akan's base, they come across more soldiers and destroy them as well. At last, they reach Akan's base at night. There, they find dozens of dead bodies on the floor, which were about to be turned into cyborgs, like Henry. While Henry and Colonel Jimmy inspect the bodies, the flamethrower man returns and attacks them. Henry fights him off and beats him to death with a brick. Henry picks up a shield and a grenade launcher, while Colonel protects the original Jimmy. More soldiers approach them, so Henry launches grenades at them while another Jimmy clone sacrifices himself for distraction. They all hop on an elevator, where Colonel Jimmy reveals that earlier he had seen a memory blocker in Henry's system, but didn't disable it because it might have distracted Henry from their fight with Akan. He disables it now, and Henry starts seeing bits and pieces of his memories. Jimmy reveals that he is dying because he got hit with a shard of glass in his neck. The Colonel shakes Jimmy's hand and tells him it was nice to have him as a friend. The original Jimmy wakes up and informs Henry that his original memories are going to return, so he needs to believe them because they are true. Jimmy passes away, and Henry closes his eyes. Henry now reaches the upper floors, where dozens of soldiers fire at him. Henry uses the shield to protect himself and blows up all of them by firing grenades. Henry then enters a room where he sees a giant screen playing everything Henry had seen after he became a cyborg. Aiken then appears on the screen and reveals that his army of cyber soldiers is ready. Aiken reveals that all of his soldiers are exactly like Henry, because the only thing they remember is their wife, Estelle, waking them up and pretending to love them like their wife. Akan reveals Estelle is his wife, and he used her for all of his soldiers so they could have an emotional motive, which was lacking in Jimmy's original cyber soldier design. Akan unleashes the first cyber soldier on Henry. He enters the room and attacks Henry, while Akan heads to the roof. Henry battles the soldier, while the rest of the army starts to approach. He locks the door to buy himself more time to rip out the dead soldier's new battery and replace it with his low-power battery. Henry stands up with full energy and rushes towards the roof. He runs towards Akan, but Akan throws him back using his powers. Akan's cyber soldiers arrive on the roof and surround Henry. Henry fights them off one by one. He kicks them, punches them, and smashes their heads into concrete. He reaches Akan, but he uses his psychic powers again, throwing Henry back into the army. Henry locks himself in the armory and grabs a gun. The soldiers try to break in, but Henry shoots off their limbs one by one. Henry finds a pile of grenades and sets them off. He escapes the armory, while the explosion takes out most of the cyber soldiers. Henry finds adrenaline in a medical kit and injects himself with it to fight the remaining soldiers. Henry brutally beats most of them until Akon enters the fight himself. He forces Henry to punch himself with his powers and knocks him down. Henry wakes up and witnesses Estelle kissing Akon. Akon reveals he will be able to make thousands of cyber soldiers like Henry within weeks, all thanks to Henry's experience. He kicks Henry aside where he faces a piece of mirror, giving us a glimpse at his face. Henry remembers his childhood memory again, when his father mocked him for not defending himself. Henry remembers his father continuing to ask him if he's always going to let others harm him or if he's ever going to fight back. Now, Henry ties barbed wire around his fists and attacks Akon again. He punches Akon and splits his hand in half to stop his powers. Akon tries to use his powers again, so Henry rips out his eye stalk, wraps around Akon's head, and splits the top half of his head. Estelle tries to escape on a chopper, but Henry climbs aboard with Akon's severed head and taunts Estelle with it. Estelle shoots Henry, but he blocks it with his robotic left hand. The bullet reflects and hits Estelle. Estelle gets knocked out of the helicopter but hangs on. She manipulates Henry into saving her, but Henry shuts the door on her fingers, causing her to fall to her death. The movie ends here. I hope you liked the story recap. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.